The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the worn wooden walls of the Montana ranch house. Outside, December snow fell thick and silent, blanketing the world in white just as it had 60 years before. Jack Carter sat in his chair, 97 years old now, his weathered hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Across from him, his grandson Samuel shifted nervously, the boy's duffel bag already packed and waiting by the door. Tomorrow morning, Samuel would board a train to basic training. Tomorrow, he would begin his journey to a war that had already consumed millions. Tomorrow, he would step into manhood, whether he was ready or not. But tonight, Jack needed the boy to understand something. Something that couldn't be taught in boot camp or learned from drill sergeants. Something that had been passed down through 3 generations of Carter men, written not in words but in blood, in snow, and the choices that define a man when everything else falls away. Jack reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a simple silver ring, its surface worn smooth by decades of wear. He held it up to the firelight, watching the flames reflect in the metal. "Boy," Jack said, his voice still strong despite his years, "before you go off to war, you need to understand what it means to be a man. Not the kind they teach in boot camp. The kind that built this ranch, this family, this legacy you're about to fight for." Samuel leaned forward, his young face serious in the flickering light. He had heard pieces of this story before, fragments passed down through dinner conversations and quiet moments. But he had never heard it complete, not like this, not from the man who had lived it. Jack turned the ring slowly between his fingers. This ring saved 3 lives in the winter of 1883, and it started with a little girl running through the snow, bleeding from frostbite, begging a stranger to save her mama from freezing to death. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were looking not at the room before him, but at something far away, something locked in memory and time. His voice softened, taking on the cadence of a man stepping back through the decades. "Let me take you back, Samuel. Back to when I was 37 years old and still thought I knew what loneliness meant." The scene dissolved, years peeling away like pages turning backward through time, until the old man's voice became the narrator of a story written in winter and blood. Montana Territory, December 1883. The temperature had dropped to 25 degrees below zero, and the wind came howling down from the north like something with teeth. The kind of cold that didn't just chill you, the kind that killed. Jack Carter stood in the middle of his modest ranch, a branding iron still hot in his gloved hand. At 37, he was already known throughout the territory as one of the best cattlemen who ever drove a herd from Texas to Montana. They called him Silverback, not for his age but for the streak of gray that had appeared in his dark hair 3 years earlier, the winter his wife Margaret and his son Joshua had died from scarlet fever. 3 years. It felt like 30. It felt like yesterday. He lived alone now in a ranch that had once held a family. 50 head of cattle, 12 horses, a modest home with a stone fireplace that threw more heat than most in the territory, and silence. Always the silence. Jack was pressing the brand to the hide of a young steer when he saw her, a small figure moving across the white landscape, dark against the snow, running with the desperate gait of someone fleeing death itself. Even from a distance, he could see the uneven pattern of her footsteps, could see the dark spots she left behind in the snow. Blood. Jack dropped the branding iron without a second thought. His mind, trained by years on the cattle trails where seconds could mean the difference between life and death, assessed the situation instantly. A child, running from something, injured, in weather that would kill a grown man in an hour. He moved with the efficiency of a man who had learned long ago not to waste motion. He caught his Tennessee Walker, a 12-year-old mare named Molly, who knew the territory like the most on her master's palm. He swung into the saddle without benefit of stirrups or preparation. The girl was still 200 yards away, but he could see now that she was small, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing nothing but a thin cotton dress that offered no protection against the killing cold. Jack touched his heels to Molly's flanks, and the horse responded instantly, moving from standstill to gallop in 3 strides. The girl stumbled as he approached, her small legs finally giving out beneath her. Jack brought Molly alongside without slowing, leaning down with the practiced ease of a man who had spent half his life working from horseback. His hand caught the girl's arm, and he pulled her up and across the saddle in front of him in one smooth motion. She was light as kindling, her body shaking so violently he could feel it through both their layers of clothing. Her lips had gone blue, and her small feet were bare, the skin an angry red that would soon turn black if not treated. Frostbite. Advanced stages. The girl looked up at him with eyes far too old for her young face. "My mama," she whispered through chattering teeth. "They tied mama to the stone. Said the cold would teach her not to be a burden. Please, mister." "She's turning blue." Jack didn't ask who they were. Didn't ask what stone. Didn't ask any of the questions a cautious man might ask. He simply turned Molly toward the Yellowstone River, 2 miles distant, and gave the horse her head. The girl clung to his coat with fingers that had lost most of their feeling. "I ran so far," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't think anyone would come. Nobody ever comes." "Someone came," Jack said, his voice low and steady against the wind. "Hold on tight now. What's your name?" "Sarah," she managed. "Sarah Hayes. My mama's Emma." Jack felt something catch in his chest at the child's formality, the way she gave both names as if establishing identity in case she didn't survive to provide it later. He had seen that kind of preparation before, that kind of resigned acceptance of death. It had no place in a child. "How far to this stone, Sarah?" "Past the big oak with the broken branch," she said, her small arm lifting to point ahead. "Where the water bends around the big rocks." Jack knew the place. The Yellowstone River made a sharp curve there, and in the center of the shallow water sat a broad, flat stone that had been used for decades as a gathering place, a washing place, a place where children played in summer. Today, it would serve a crueler purpose. The wind picked up as they rode, driving snow into their faces like needles of ice. Jack bent forward, sheltering Sarah with his body as much as possible. The girl's shaking had begun to subside, which worried him more than the shaking itself. When the body stopped fighting the cold, death was close behind. "Stay awake, Sarah," he said firmly. "Tell me about your mama." "She's pretty," Sarah said, her voice growing distant. "She has yellow hair like summer wheat. She sings sometimes, when she thinks nobody's listening. She used to sing all the time before Papa died." "When did your Papa die?" "2 winters ago. He fell off his horse. He was drunk," Mama said, though she wasn't supposed to say that. "Uncle Jeremiah said it was Mama's fault. Said she was bad luck. Said God was punishing them through her." Jack's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "And this Uncle Jeremiah, he's the one who tied your mama to the stone?" Sarah nodded against his chest. "Him and his men. They came this morning. Said the river would judge her. Said if God wanted her to live, she would. If not, then it was his will." "God doesn't tie women to rocks," Jack said quietly. "Men do that, and men can answer for it." They crested a low rise and the river came into view below. Even through the blowing snow, Jack could see the figure slumped against the stone in the middle of the frozen shallows. A woman in a simple dress, her dark shape stark against the white ice and water. He urged Molly down the slope, the horse picking her way carefully through snow that had drifted to her knees in places. As they drew closer, the details became clearer and more terrible. Emma Hayes had been bound to the stone with heavy rope, her arms pulled behind her back and secured to an iron ring that someone had driven into the rock years ago for tethering horses. Her head hung forward, blonde hair matted with ice and snow. Her dress was torn at the back, and even from 20 feet away, Jack could see the angry red of her skin where frostbite had set in. She wasn't moving. Jack dismounted before Molly had fully stopped, his boots breaking through the thin ice at the river's edge. The water beneath was shallow, perhaps 6 inches deep, but cold enough to kill. He waded out to the stone, Sarah still clutched in one arm, his free hand reaching for the knife at his belt. "Emma!" Sarah cried out, her voice cracking with fear and hope. "Emma, I brought help. He came." The woman stirred slightly at her daughter's voice, but she didn't lift her head. Jack set Sarah down on a dry part of the stone, then moved to examine the ropes. They had been tied with brutal efficiency, the knots pulled tight and then soaked with water that had frozen solid. Whoever had done this had meant for these bonds to last until death. Jack's Wilson Bowie knife had a 7-inch blade that he kept razor sharp for field dressing game. It made short work of the frozen rope, though he had to be careful not to cut the woman's skin, which had gone numb and unresponsive to touch. One by one the bonds fell away. When the last rope parted, Emma Hayes collapsed forward. Jack caught her before she could fall into the water, gathering her slight weight into his arms. She was too light, he thought, far too light for a grown woman. The kind of light that came from months of not eating enough, of giving her portions to a child, of slow starvation disguised as sacrifice. He pulled the heavy leather coat from his own shoulders and wrapped it around her, then lifted her fully into his arms. Her head rolled against his chest, and he could feel how cold she was even through his layers of clothing. Hypothermia. Advanced stages. If he didn't get her warm soon, the cold would stop her heart before morning. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "Can you hold on to my back while I carry your mama?" The girl nodded, still shaking but determined. Jack knelt in the shallow water, and Sarah climbed onto his back, her small arms wrapping around his neck. He stood carefully, Emma cradled against his chest, Sarah clinging to his shoulders, and waded back through the ice-cold water to where Molly waited patiently on the shore. Getting all three of them onto the horse required some maneuvering, but Jack had spent 2 decades working cattle from horseback, and his body remembered motions his mind might have forgotten. He settled into the saddle with Emma across his lap, her head resting against his shoulder. Sarah sat behind him, her arms around his waist. "Hold tight," he told the girl. "We're going home." The ride back to the ranch took 20 minutes that felt like hours. The sun was already beginning its descent toward the western mountains, and with it would come temperatures that could drop to 40 below. Jack kept his body bent forward, sheltering Emma from the worst of the wind, while Sarah pressed against his back for warmth. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride. Once she opened her eyes and looked up at Jack's face with an expression of such confusion and fear that it made something in his chest tighten. "Who?" she whispered, the word barely audible. "Someone who came," Jack said simply. "Rest now." Her eyes closed again, but not before Jack saw the tears that had frozen on her lashes. As they rode, Sarah's grip around his waist loosened slightly, and Jack realized she was losing her fight with consciousness. "Sarah," he said sharply, "stay with me. Tell me what you see ahead." "Snow," she mumbled, "just snow." "Look harder. What's that dark shape to the left?" "Your barn?" "That's right. We're almost home, almost warm. Stay awake for me." "I'm trying," she said, her voice small and tired. "I'm really trying." "I know you are. You're doing fine." When they finally reached the ranch, full darkness had fallen. Jack dismounted with practiced care, Sarah sliding off first and nearly collapsing when her feet touched the ground. Jack steadied her with one hand while keeping Emma secure with his other arm. Then he carried the woman toward the house while Sarah stumbled alongside. The warmth of the house hit them like a physical force as Jack pushed through the door. He had left the fire burning low that morning, but it had been enough to keep the interior temperature well above freezing. Now he would need more heat than that. Much more. "Sarah," he said as he laid Emma on the floor 6 feet from the hearth. "Can you add wood to the fire? 3 pieces, no more. We can't make it too hot too fast." The girl nodded and moved to obey, her child's hands shaking as she selected logs from the wood box. Jack was already working on Emma, his hands moving with the efficiency of a man who had treated frostbite before, who had seen what cold could do to human flesh and knew the narrow window between too little heat and too much. He cut away her wet dress with his knife, stripping her down to her undergarments without hesitation or impropriety. This was medicine, not modesty. This was life and death. He wrapped her in dry blankets from his own bed, layer upon layer of wool that would trap her body's remaining heat while allowing it to gradually warm. Her feet and hands were the worst. The skin had gone from red to a mottled purple-black that spoke of tissue damage. Jack filled his largest pot with water and set it near the fire, testing the temperature with his wrist every 30 seconds. 95 degrees, not hot, not even warm by most standards, but warm enough to begin the slow process of rewarming without sending her body into shock. When the water reached the right temperature, Jack carefully submerged Emma's hands and feet, supporting her limbs with his own hands beneath the water. Sarah watched from the other side of the hearth, her young face drawn with exhaustion and fear. "Is Mama going to die?" she asked quietly. Jack looked at the woman's pale face, at the shallow rise and fall of her chest, at the bluish tint to her lips. The honest answer was maybe. The kind answer was different. Not if I can help it, he said. But she's very sick, Sarah. Her body has been cold for a long time. We have to warm her slowly, carefully. Too fast, and we can hurt her worse. How do you know how to do all this? I've worked cattle in winter for 20 years. I've seen frostbite before. I've seen what happens when you don't treat it right. He didn't mention that he had also seen men die from it, seen fingers and toes turn black and fall off, seen strong men reduced to invalids by the cold. Sarah didn't need to know that part. After 5 minutes, Jack lifted Emma's hands and feet from the water, dried them carefully, and wrapped them in dry wool. Her core temperature was what mattered most now. He needed to get heat into her center, her chest and abdomen, without shocking her heart. He prepared a mixture of warm water, honey, and a careful measure of whiskey, then lifted Emma's head and shoulders, supporting her against his chest. Emma, he said firmly, Emma, I need you to drink. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Emma, he said again, more insistent, your daughter needs you to drink. At the mention of Sarah, Emma's eyes opened slightly. Jack pressed the cup to her lips, tilting it carefully. Most of the liquid ran down her chin, but some went in and he saw her throat work as she swallowed reflexively. Good, he murmured. That's good. A little more. He got perhaps 2 ounces into her before she turned her head away, a small sound of distress escaping her throat. Jack laid her back down gently, adjusting the blankets around her. Sarah, he said without looking away from Emma, there's a pot on the stove with beef stew. It's probably cold, but it's food. Can you eat something for me? I'm not hungry. I know, eat anyway. Your mama's going to need you to be strong tomorrow. He heard Sarah move to the stove, heard the scrape of a spoon against the pot. Good. The child needed food and warmth as much as her mother, though her case was less severe. Jack settled himself beside Emma, checking her pulse at her wrist, then at her throat. 45 beats per minute, dangerously slow but not stopped. Not yet. He pulled more blankets from his trunk, covering her until only her face was visible. As he worked, Jack was peripherally aware of Sarah eating by the stove, the girl's eyes never leaving her mother's still form. When she had finished the stew, she came to sit beside Jack, her slight frame pressed against his side for warmth. Thank you, she said quietly, for helping us. Jack glanced down at her. No need for thanks. Everyone else just watched. When Uncle Jeremiah came this morning, people were there. They saw him tie her up. Nobody tried to stop him. Her voice was small but steady, the voice of a child who had already learned that the world was not always kind or just. Why did you come? Jack was silent for a long moment, his hand resting on Emma's shoulder to monitor her breathing. Finally, he said, because nobody else did. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was truth enough for now. The whole truth was more complicated, written in the scar tissue on his own heart, in the memory of 2 graves on a hillside, in 3 years of waking up to a house that echoed with absence. The whole truth was that Jack Carter had spent 3 years watching death approach and being powerless to stop it, had spent 3 years haunted by the memory of riding 20 miles through a blizzard to fetch a doctor who refused to come because the distance was too great, the weather too dangerous, the fee too uncertain. Had spent 3 years living with the knowledge that he had returned home to find his wife and son already cold, already beyond any help he could provide. Sarah wouldn't understand that truth. Not yet, maybe not ever. But it was the truth that had made Jack drop his branding iron without a second thought when he saw a small figure running through the snow. It was the truth that had sent him riding hard to a frozen river without asking questions or calculating risks. Some debts could only be paid forward. As the evening wore into night, Jack maintained his vigil beside Emma. He changed the water in the pot 3 times, each time bringing the temperature up by a few degrees, each time soaking her hands and feet for 5-minute intervals. He dripped water and honey mixture into her mouth whenever she showed signs of consciousness. He adjusted blankets and checked her pulse and breathing every 15 minutes like clockwork. Sarah eventually fell asleep curled against his side, her small body finally giving in to the exhaustion of her ordeal. Jack carefully moved her to his own bed, covering her with his last spare blanket, then returned to Emma's side. Around midnight, Emma's eyes opened fully for the first time. They were blue, Jack noticed, the color of a summer squand. They were also filled with confusion and fear. "Where?" she managed, her voice cracked and raw. "My ranch," Jack said quietly. "About 3 miles from where I found you. You're safe here." "Sarah?" "Asleep. She's fine. Cold and tired, but fine. You got her out in time." Emma's eyes closed again, but Jack could see tears leaking from beneath her lids. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack didn't respond. There was nothing to say to gratitude for doing what any decent man should do. When Emma's breathing had deepened into sleep, Jack finally allowed himself to stand and stretch muscles that had been locked in position for hours. He added more wood to the fire, checked on Sarah sleeping in his bed, then stood at the window looking out at the darkness beyond. Snow was still falling, thick and relentless. In this weather, no one would be traveling. The Wade men, whoever they were, would be holed up somewhere waiting out the storm, which meant Jack had time. Time to get Emma and Sarah stronger. Time to figure out what came next. As he stood there, Jack's hand unconsciously moved to his chest, pressing against the shirt beneath which lay a long puckered scar. Sarah had noticed it earlier when he had stripped off his heavy coat. He had seen her eyes widen, seen the question form on her lips before fatigue had stolen her words. The scar was from Antietam, from a Confederate minie-ball that had punched through his chest and somehow missed his heart by less than an inch. 21 years ago now, but on cold nights like this, the old wound still ached with remembered fire. Jack turned from the window and looked at the woman lying near his hearth, wrapped in his blankets, her blonde hair drying in the firelight. Sarah had said her mother was a Hayes, that her father had died 2 years back, that the Wades were her husband's family, and they blamed her for bringing bad luck. Jack had heard stories like this before. Widows left vulnerable to the cruelties of in-laws who saw them as burdens, as mouths to feed with no compensating value. Women who had no property, no money, no male relatives to speak for them. Women who could be disposed of with impunity because no one would question it. No one would investigate too closely. The frontier was hard on everyone, but it was hardest on those without power. And a widow with a child and no resources had no power at all. Jack returned to Emma's side, settling himself on the floor beside her. He would watch through the night, monitoring her condition, ready to act if her situation worsened. He had done this before, sat vigil through the darkness, though the last time he had failed. Margaret and Joshua had slipped away despite everything he could do, their bodies consumed by a fever that had burned them from within. This time would be different. This time he had found them in time. This time he could save them. Emma stirred slightly in her sleep, a small sound of distress escaping her lips. Jack placed his hand gently on her shoulder, a gesture meant to comfort, to anchor her to the warmth and safety of the present moment. "Rest easy," he said quietly, though he didn't know if she could hear him. "You're safe now, both of you. I give you my word." The fire crackled, the wind howled outside, and Jack Carter kept his vigil through the long winter night, a man who had failed once before and could not fail again. By the time dawn light began to seep through the windows, Emma's color had improved slightly. Her lips were less blue, her breathing more regular. When Jack checked her pulse, it had risen to 55 beats per minute, still low, but better, moving in the right direction. Sarah woke as the sun rose, climbing out of bed and padding over to where her mother lay. "Is she better?" she asked, her voice still rough with sleep. "Some," Jack said. "She's not out of danger yet, but she's fighting. That's what matters. Can I sit with her?" Jack nodded and moved aside. Sarah settled beside her mother, taking Emma's hand carefully in her own small ones. "I'm here, Mama," she whispered. "I found help, just like you said. Mr. Jack saved you." Jack stood and moved to the stove, where he began preparing food. Beef stew again, the same pot from last night, but this time he would heat it properly, add some dried vegetables and a handful of oats to thicken it. Both Sarah and Emma would need nourishment to recover their strength. As he worked, he could hear Sarah talking quietly to her unconscious mother, telling her about the ride through the snow, about Mr. Jack's horse Molly, about how warm the house was compared to the stone. The child's voice was steady and matter-of-fact, as if she were reporting on the weather rather than describing their near death. Too much experience with hardship, Jack thought. Too many lessons learned too young about survival and loss in the casual cruelties the world could inflict. Around mid-morning, and Emma woke again. This time her eyes were clearer, more focused. She looked at Sarah first, her face crumpling with relief and love. Then her gaze moved to Jack where he stood by the stove. Sarah told me, she said, her voice still weak but steadier than before, that you rode to the river, that you cut me free. Jack nodded but said nothing. Why, Emma asked. You don't know me, you don't owe me anything. Why would you risk yourself in that weather for a stranger? Jack considered his answer carefully. He could give her the simple truth that he had seen a child running through the snow and had reacted on instinct. Or he could give her the deeper truth, the one that lived in the scars on his chest, in the graves on the hillside, in the empty rooms of a house that had once held a family. In the end, he settled for something in between. Because someone needed help, he said, and I could give it. Emma's eyes searched his face, looking for something. Ulterior motives, perhaps, hidden expectations, the hook beneath the offered help. Jack had seen that look before, in the eyes of animals that had been mistreated, in the faces of people who had learned that kindness always came with a price. I can't pay you, she said quietly. I have nothing. The Wades took everything. I'm not asking for payment. Then what do you want? Jack met her gaze steadily. Nothing you are not willing to give, which right now is just rest and recovery. Everything else can wait. Emma studied him for a long moment, then her eyes moved around the room, taking in details. The spare but well-maintained furnishings, the absence of a woman's touch in the decorations and arrangements, the single bed where Sarah had slept, the man's coat hanging by the door. You live here alone, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. For how long? 3 years. Something shifted in Emma's expression, a recognition of shared loss. I'm sorry. Don't be. That's just the way of things. Before Emma could respond, a sound came from outside. Hoofbeats approaching through the snow. Multiple horses. Jack's hand moved instinctively toward his gun belt, hanging on a peg by the door, but he forced himself to relax. Too soon for the Wades to come calling. More likely a neighbor or one of the other ranchers who worked this stretch of territory. Jack moved to the window and looked out. 3 men on horseback were approaching the house, their forms indistinct through the still falling snow. As they drew closer, Jack recognized the lead rider as Otis Flynn, the blacksmith from Cold Springs, and one of the few men in the territory Jack counted as a friend. He opened the door before Otis could knock, stepping out onto the porch and pulling the door closed behind him. No need for Emma and Sarah to be frightened by strange men appearing at the door. Otis was 55 years old, with long gray hair tied back from a lined face and eyes that had seen too much of the world's hardness to be easily fooled. He had been a preacher once, before losing his faith and his left hand to gangrene in the same hard winter. Now he worked metal and performed occasional marriages for people who couldn't afford or didn't want Pastor Morrison's services. Jack, Otis said, his breath steaming in the cold air. Word in town is that Jeremiah Wade is telling folks his sister-in-law ran off and took his niece with her. Says he's concerned for their welfare in this weather. Says if anyone sees them, they should return them to Wade property immediately. Jack's jaw tightened. That's so? That's what he's saying, but I also heard from old Mrs. Henderson, who lives near the Wade place. She says she saw Jeremiah and 4 of his men ride out yesterday morning with rope and anger. Says she saw them come back at midday without the woman or child. Says she tried to ask questions and got told to mind her business. And did she? Mrs. Henderson has minded her own business for 73 years. She knows when to speak and when to stay quiet. Otis shifted in his saddle, but she thought someone should know what she saw. So she told me, and I'm telling you. Jack nodded slowly. I appreciate that. You got them here then? Emma Wade and her girl? I do. They all right? They will be. Otis was quiet for a moment, his eyes studying Jack's face. This is going to bring trouble, Jack. Wade's got money and influence. He's got the ear of Pastor Morrison and half the town council. If he wants those 2 back, he's got the law on his side. Well, the law that says a man can tie his sister-in-law to a rock and leave her to freeze. The law that says a widow and her child belong to the guardianship of her deceased husband's eldest male relative. Montana territory, law is pretty clear on that, Jack. Emma Wade is legally under Jeremiah Wade's authority until she remarries or 2 years pass from her husband's death. Jack's hand tightened on the porch railing. How long has Thomas Wade been dead? Thomas died in March of '82, not quite 2 years yet. Jeremiah's authority runs until March of '84. That's 3 months from now. Otis paused. Unless she remarries before then. The implication hung in the cold air between them. Jack said nothing. Just think about it, Otis said finally. I know you don't want trouble, but trouble's coming whether you want it or not. Best to be prepared. He touched his hat in farewell and turned his horse back toward town, the other two riders following. Jack stood on the porch long after they had disappeared, watching the snow fall and thinking about the woman lying near his hearth, the child sleeping in his bed, the empty rooms of his house that hadn't held life in 3 years. He thought about Margaret and Joshua, about the graves he visited every Sunday, about the promises he had made to himself in the darkness after they died. Promises about never letting himself care again, about keeping the world at arm's length, about maintaining the safe distance between himself and anything that could hurt him. And then he thought about a small girl running through the snow, about blue eyes looking at him with confusion and fear, about Sarah's question echoing in his mind. Why did you come? Because nobody else did. Jack turned and went back into the house. Emma was awake, Sarah sitting beside her. Both of them looked at him with expressions that were part hope, part fear, all uncertainty. That was Otis Flynn, Jack said. He's a friend. He brought word from town. Jeremiah Wade is claiming you ran off, that he's worried about you in this weather. Emma's face went pale. He's not worried, he's angry. And when Jeremiah's angry, people get hurt. He can't hurt you here. You don't know him. You don't know what he's capable of. Jack moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. Maybe not, but he doesn't know me either, and he's about to find out what I'm capable of. He turned back to Emma and Sarah, his expression calm but his eyes holding something hard and immovable. You're safe here, both of you, for as long as you need. That's a promise, and I keep my promises. Sarah looked at her mother, then at Jack, then back to her mother. See, Mama, she said softly, I told you Mr. Jack was different. I told you he was good. Emma's eyes filled with tears that she blinked away quickly. I don't know how to thank you. Then don't try, Jack said. Just rest. Get your strength, Beck. Everything else can wait. But even as he said it, Jack knew that everything else couldn't wait for long. The snow would stop falling eventually. The roads would clear. And when they did, Jeremiah Wade would come calling. That much was certain. What happened then would depend on choices not yet made, on paths not yet chosen, on the space between the life Jack had been living and the life that stood before him now, frightened and vulnerable, and looking to him for protection he wasn't sure he could provide. But he would try. God help him, he would try. Because 37 years of living had taught Jack Carter many things. But the most important lesson had been learned 3 years ago on a winter night much like this one, when he had ridden 20 miles through a blizzard and arrived home too late to save anyone. This time he had arrived in time. This time he had a chance to make different choices. This time perhaps the story could have a different ending. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white, erasing tracks and filling in footprints, giving them all a brief window of peace before the storm of consequences arrived. Jack settled into his chair, watching over the woman and child who had stumbled into his solitary life, and wondered if 3 years of careful distance could be undone by one desperate rescue on a frozen winter day. He suspected he was about to find out. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that was both familiar and strange. Emma's body healed slowly, the angry purple of frostbite fading to pink and then to pale skin that remained tender but functional. Her hands and feet had escaped the worst of the damage, though she would carry the scars for the rest of her life. Small mercies, Jack thought, watching her learn to walk again with careful, deliberate steps. Sarah adapted with the resilience of children, her natural brightness returning as warmth and regular meals worked their magic. She had taken to following Jack around the ranch, asking endless questions about cattle and horses and the 100 small tasks that filled a rancher's day. Jack found himself answering with a patience he didn't know he possessed. showing her how to feed the chickens, how to check a horse's hooves for stones, how to read weather in the movement of clouds. Emma had moved from the floor near the hearth to the small cabin adjacent to the main house, a structure Jack had hastily cleaned and repaired. It had once served as sleeping quarters for seasonal workers, back when Jack ran a larger operation. Now it gave Emma and Sarah privacy while keeping them close enough for safety. The arrangement was practical, necessary, and completely scandalous by the standards of Cold Springs society. Jack knew this because Otis had mentioned it on his second visit, and his third, and every visit thereafter. The town was talking. Pastor Morrison had made pointed comments from the pulpit about propriety and the moral decay of frontier society. Women whispered behind their hands when Emma's name was mentioned, though none of them had offered to take her in themselves. Jack ignored it all. He had learned long ago that other people's opinions held no weight when measured against what a man knew to be right. Still, he was not surprised when, on a cold January morning, he looked up from mending fence to see Pastor Morrison riding up the snow-packed trail to his ranch, accompanied by two members of the town council. Jack set down his tools and waited, his face impassive as the three men dismounted. Pastor Morrison was a tall man with gray hair and the kind of stern features that looked permanently set in disapproval. He had been the spiritual leader of Cold Springs for 15 years, and in that time had become as much political power broker as religious guide. "Mr. Carter," the pastor said, his breath steaming in the cold air, "we need to speak with you about the situation here." "What situation would that be, Pastor?" "Don't play coy. The entire town knows you're harboring Emma Weiwei and Arashot without proper supervision or arrangement. The impropriety of it is causing considerable concern among the decent folk of our community." Jack's expression didn't change. "Mrs. Hayes was dying when I found her. I rendered aid. I failed to see the impropriety in that." "Mrs. Wade," the pastor corrected sharply. "She remains legally married to the Wade name and therefore under the guardianship of Jeremiah Wade as her deceased husband's elder brother. Montana territory law is quite explicit on this matter." One of the council members, a shopkeeper named Aldrich, stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, no one questions that you acted from good intentions. But the situation has gone on long enough. Mrs. Wade must either return to her proper family or you must formalize this arrangement through marriage. And if she doesn't wish to return to the Wades, that's not for her to decide," Pastor Morrison said flatly. "She is a woman without male relatives to speak for her. The law provides clear guidance in such cases." Jack's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "The law also provides for a widow to refuse guardianship if she can prove abuse or neglect. I'd say being tied to a rock in freezing temperatures qualifies." "That's Jeremiah's word against hers," Aldrich said uncomfortably. "And a woman's testimony carries less weight than a man's, especially when the man in question is a respected landowner." "Respected," Jack repeated, letting the word hang in the air with all its bitter irony. The pastor pulled a folded paper from his coat. "This is a formal notice from the town council. You have 1 week to resolve this situation. Either Mrs. Wade returns to Wade property, or you marry her in a ceremony I will personally oversee. If neither occurs, the territorial marshal will be summoned to enforce the guardianship laws." Jack took the paper but didn't look at it. "And if I refuse? Then you'll be arrested for harboring a woman against her legal guardian's wishes. You'll lose this ranch, Mr. Carter. Everything you've built, is that really worth it for a woman you barely know?" Before Jack could answer, the door to the small cabin opened. Emma stepped out, wrapped in a shawl Jack had given her blonde hair pulled back in a simple braid. She had heard everything. Jack could see it in the set of her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the shawl. "Pastor Morrison," she said, her voice steady despite the cold. "I am Emma Hayes. My married name died with my husband 2 years ago, and I will not return to the Wades. Not now. Not ever." The pastor's face hardened. "That is not your decision to make, woman. The law is clear." "Then the law is wrong. The law is the law, and if Mr. Carter continues to harbor you in this inappropriate manner, he will face consequences." Emma looked at Jack, something passing between them in that glance. A question, an offer, a possibility that neither of them had spoken aloud but that had been growing in the silence of the past 3 weeks. "Give us the week," Jack said quietly. "We'll have an answer for you then." Pastor Morrison studied them both with narrowed eyes, then nodded curtly. 1 week, Mr. Carter. No more. He remounted his horse, and the three men rode back toward town, leaving tracks in the fresh snow. When they were gone, Emma walked slowly across the yard to where Jack stood. Her feet were still tender, and she moved with care, but her back was straight and her head held high. I won't let them force you into anything, she said. I can leave. Sarah and I can go somewhere else, find another town. And then what? The same situation all over again? You're still legally under Wade guardianship for 4 more months. That doesn't change with geography. Then what do you suggest? Jack looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just the woman who had been near death 3 weeks ago, but the person she was becoming as strength returned. She was younger than Margaret had been, with different features and different mannerisms. But there was something in her eyes, some core of steel that had survived everything the world had thrown at her, that reminded him of what strength truly looked like. I need to make a trip, he said finally, to Miles City. It's 180 miles from here through the snowy mountains. I'll be gone 3 weeks, maybe more. Emma's face fell. You're leaving? I'm going to drive 30 head of cattle to market. At $50 a head, that's $1,500. And that's $1,500. I've got $800 in savings. That gives me $2,300. I don't understand. What does that have to do with anything? Jack pulled his work gloves back on, his movements deliberate. This morning before the pastor arrived, I rode into Cold Springs, spoke with Marcus Blackwood, the attorney there, asked him about your situation. And when he told me that your late husband took out a mortgage on your father's land in Helena before he died, 160 acres. The mortgage was for $2,000. Now with interest, it's $2,400. Jeremiah Wade holds that debt. If it's not paid by March 1st, he takes possession of that land. Emma's hand went to her throat. I didn't know. Thomas never told me about any mortgage. Blackwood showed me the papers. It's all legal, but here's the thing. If someone pays that debt, the land reverts to you free and clear. And once you own property in your own name, the guardianship laws become a lot more complicated. You'd have legal standing to refuse Wade's authority. You want to pay my husband's debt. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. Why would you do that? Because it's the right thing to do. That's your life savings, Jack, plus a dangerous cattle drive in the middle of winter. Men die on those drives even in good weather, and you'd be doing it with a skeleton crew at best. I've done it before. When you were younger, when you had a full team. Emma shook her head. I can't ask this of you. You're not asking. I'm offering. And if you don't come back, if something happens to you out there in the snow in the mountains, her voice cracked slightly, I won't have another man's death on my conscience, Jack. I won't. Jack looked at her for a long moment. 3 years ago, I watched my wife and son die because I couldn't get help to them in time. I've lived with that failure every day since. This isn't about you asking or me sacrificing. This is about me having a chance to save someone when it matters. Don't take that from me. The words hung between them, raw and honest in a way Jack rarely allowed himself to be. If I agree to this, she said slowly, what happens when you get back? If you get back? That depends on what you decide over the next 3 weeks. Pastor Morrison wants an answer in 7 days. I won't be back by then. So you'll have to make a choice without me here to influence it. What choice, Val? Whether you want to take a chance on a broke cattleman with a falling down ranch and more ghosts than future. Whether you think 3 weeks of knowing me is enough to gamble the rest of your life on. Understanding dawned in Emma's eyes. You're asking me to marry you. I'm asking you to think about it. Not because of the law or the pastor or what the town thinks, but because you want to. If the answer is no when I get back, that's fine. I'll have paid the debt either way and you'll have your land and your independence. But if the answer is yes, he paused, then we figure out what comes next together. Emma was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving past Jack to the cabin where Sarah was visible through the window, playing with a rag doll Otis had brought on his last visit. When she looked back at Jack, something had changed in her expression. I need to tell you something, she said. Before you ride off to risk your life for me, You need to know who you're helping." She reached into the pocket of her dress and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. Carefully, she unfolded the fabric to reveal a tarnished brass military badge. Confederate States of America, 7th Virginia Cavalry, Company B. "This was my brother Daniel's," she said quietly. "He fought for the South. He died at Antietam in the cavalry charge on Burnside Bridge. He was 17 years old." Jack took the badge, turning it over in his gloved hands. The metal was worn smooth in places, as if it had been held often over the years. He said nothing, just examined it with the careful attention he gave to all important things. "The war split my family," Emma continued. "My oldest brother William fought for the Union. My father never forgave him for it. When we got word that William had been killed at Gettysburg, my father just gave up. We lost the farm. I was married off to Thomas Wade to settle debts." She paused. "I know you fought in the war, Jack. I've seen the scar on your chest. I need to know which side you were on before this goes any further." Jack walked to the corral fence, Emma following. He leaned against the weathered wood, his eyes on the distant mountains. "Pennsylvania 51st Infantry," he said finally. "Company C, Union Army. I was at Antietam." Emma went very still. "You were there." September 17, 1862. Bloodiest single day of the war. I was 20 years old and thought I knew what fighting meant. By the end of that day, I understood I'd known nothing at all. "You were at the bridge," Emma said, her voice barely audible, "where Daniel died." "I was. We held that bridge for 3 hours against repeated cavalry charges. Lost half our company doing it." Jack pulled open his shirt collar, exposing the puckered scar on his chest. "Got this from a Confederate mini-A ball during one of those charges. Went clean through, missed my heart by less than an inch. I should have died that day." "You might have been the one who shot Daniel," Emma whispered. "Or he might have been the one who shot you." Jack turned to face her fully. "That's possible. Likely even given where we both were. In that kind of fighting, you don't see faces. You just see uniforms. Targets. I killed men that day, Emma. Young men, old men. Men who were probably just as scared as I was, just as desperate to survive." He paused. "I don't know if I killed your brother, but I might have. And you need to decide if you can live with that possibility." Emma was silent for a long time, her fingers worrying the edge of Daniel's badge. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "Daniel wrote me a letter before he died. It reached our family 3 months after we got news of his death. In it, he said he didn't hate the Union soldiers he fought against. He said they were just boys like him, following orders, trying to stay alive. He said the real enemies were the men who started wars and then sent children to die in them." She looked up at Jack. "The war's been over for 18 years. Holding on to that hate, carrying it forward, that's not honoring Daniel's memory. That's just letting the people who started the war keep killing us from their graves." Jack nodded slowly. "I learned something similar. Took me years to understand it, but I got there eventually. Some wounds heal, some scars fade, but only if you let them." Emma held out the badge. "I want you to have this. Take it with you on the cattle drive. Emma, that's all you have left of your brother, which is why I want you to carry it, as a reminder that we're not who we were in that war. We're who we choose to be now." She pressed the badge into his hand. "Bring it back safe. Bring yourself back safe. And then we'll talk about what comes next." Jack closed his fingers around the badge, feeling the weight of history and possibility in equal measure. "I'll come back. That's a promise. You've already made so many promises to me. What if you can't keep them all? Then I'll die trying, but I won't fail because I didn't try at all." The sound of a door opening made them both turn. Sarah emerged from the cabin, her small face serious. She walked over to him with the deliberate steps of a child who had practiced what she was about to say. "Mr. Jack," she said formally, "are you leaving?" "Yes, Sarah, for a few weeks. Mama says you're going to help us, to make it so the bad men can't take us away." "That's the plan." Sarah reached up and took Jack's hand in both of her small ones. "Then you have to come back. Because," she hesitated, then spoke in a rush, "because I don't want a new papa if it's not going to be you." Emma gasped softly. "Sarah, we talked about this. You can't just..." but Jack knelt down to Sarah's level, his weathered face gentle. Sarah, I'm honored that you'd think of me that way, but you need to understand something. I had a son once. His name was Joshua. He died 3 years ago, and I miss him every single day. If I'm going to be someone's papa again, I need to know I can do it right. I need to prove I won't fail another child the way I failed him. How did you fail him? I wasn't there when he needed me most. I couldn't save him. Sarah considered this with the seriousness of a child who had already learned hard lessons about life and death. But you saved me, and you saved Mama. Maybe you can't save everybody. Maybe you just save the people you can. The simple wisdom of it hit Jack like a physical blow. He looked up at Emma, who had tears streaming down her face, then back at Sarah. Maybe you're right, he said quietly. Maybe that's all any of us can do. He stood, still holding Sarah's hand, and found himself making a decision he hadn't known he was going to make until the words left his mouth. When I come back from Miles City, if your mama agrees, I'd be honored to be your papa. Not to replace the father you had, but to be someone new. Someone who will do his best to keep you safe and teach you what's right. That's the best promise I can make. Sarah threw her arms around his neck, and Jack found himself holding her. This small, fierce girl who had run through the snow to save her mother, who had survived more in 8 years than many did in a lifetime. Over Sarah's shoulder, Jack met Emma's eyes. She nodded just once, but it was enough. It was answer and question and promise all at once. That evening, Otis Flynn arrived with unexpected news. Jack was in the barn preparing gear for the cattle drive when Otis's horse appeared in the doorway. You got a minute? Otis asked, dismounting with the careful movements of a man whose joints ached in the cold. Always got time for you. Otis pulled out a pipe and tobacco pouch, taking his time with the ritual of packing and lighting. When he finally had it going, he fixed Jack with a steady look. Heard from a friend in Helena. He's been asking around about Emma Hayes' family history, like I asked him to. And her brother William didn't die at Gettysburg like the family was told. He was wounded bad, lost his memory for 2 years. When he recovered and went looking for his family, he found the farm sold, the father dead, and Emma married to Thomas Wade. Jack straightened from the saddle he'd been oiling. So he's alive? More than alive. He's been sheriff of Beaverhead County for the past 3 years, about 100 miles west of here. Otis puffed on his pipe. My friend says William Hayes has been looking for his sister off and on for years. The Wade family told him Emma didn't want contact with her Union brother, and he believed them. Does he know she's here? Not yet, but word travels, especially with Pastor Morrison making noise about impropriety and guardianship. I figure we've got maybe a week before Sheriff Hayes hears that an Emma Wade is living at your ranch and starts asking questions. Jack absorbed this information, his mind working through the implications. If Emma's brother is alive and he's a sheriff, that changes things. He'd have legal standing to challenge Wade's guardianship. That's what I figure, but there's complications. William fought for the Union. Emma's got her dead brother's Confederate badge. The whole family was torn apart by the war. No telling how William will feel about his sister now or whether he'll want to get involved. He's her blood. Wade's just an in-law. Blood doesn't always mean loyalty, Jack. You know that as well as I do. Otis drew on his pipe thoughtfully. I could send word to William Hayes, let him know where his sister is, but that's a choice you and Emma need to make together. Jack nodded slowly. Don't send word yet. Let me talk to Emma first, and let me get back from Miles City. If things go wrong out there, it won't matter who her brother is. Speaking of Miles City, you know this cattle drive in February is suicide, right? I'm legally obligated as your friend to tell you that you're being a damn fool. So noted. I mean it, Jack. The snowy mountains in winter have killed better cattlemen than you. The weather alone could wipe out your whole herd. And even if you make it through, there's no guarantee the market price will be what you need. $50 a head at current Miles City prices. I checked with the broker last month. Last month was last month. Prices fluctuate. You could get there and find out they're only paying 40. Then you're short the money and this whole thing is for nothing. Jack picked up his saddle and carried it to where Molly stood waiting. Then I'll figure something else out when I get there. But I'm going, Otis. This is happening. Wyman, don't give me that line about doing the right thing. I've known you for 15 years, Jack. This is about more than just helping a woman in need. Jack settled the saddle on Molly's back, adjusting the straps with practiced hands. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. 3 years ago, I failed the two people who mattered most to me in this world. I've lived with that failure every single day. I wake up with it. I go to sleep with it. It sits at my table and walks beside me and colors everything I see. He turned to face Otis. Emma and Sarah, they're giving me something I thought I'd lost. A reason to be something other than a man waiting to die. And I'll be damned if I'm going to fail them the way I failed Margaret and Joshua. Otis was quiet for a long moment. You know you didn't fail them, right? You did everything you could. Sometimes people die despite our best efforts. That's not failure. That's just life being cruel. My head knows that. My heart's still figuring it out. Jack tightened the saddle cinch. But maybe if I can save Emma and Sarah, maybe if I can keep my promises this time, my heart will start believing what my head already knows. And if you die out there in the snow, what then? Then you make sure Emma knows I tried. You make sure she gets my land, my cattle, everything I own, and you contact her brother. Get him involved. Keep her safe however you can. You're serious. As serious as I've ever been about anything. Otis knocked the spent tobacco from his pipe. All right then, I'll watch over them while you're gone. And Jack, for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Stupid, but right. That's good enough for me. They finished preparing the gear in companionable silence. The kind of quiet that comes from years of friendship and understanding. When everything was ready, Otis mounted his horse and paused at the barn door. One more thing, Billy Carson, that cowboy who used to ride for you back in '78, he's working for the Wades now. Came into town last week asking questions about you. Wanted to know about your operation, your schedule, whether you had any hands working for you. Jack's expression hardened. Wade's doing reconnaissance. That's my thinking. He knows you've got Emma and Sarah. He knows the law's on his side. He's just waiting for the right moment to make his move. Otis adjusted his hat against the cold. Watch your back out there, Jack, and watch it even more when you get home. After Otis left, Jack walked to the cabin where Emma and Sarah were eating dinner. He knocked and Emma called for him to enter. The small space was warm and well lit, a fire burning in the modest hearth. Sarah had set the table with careful precision, and the smell of Emma's stew filled the air. It was a domestic scene, simple and unremarkable, yet it struck Jack with unexpected force. This was what a home felt like. This was what he'd been missing. I'm leaving at dawn, he said. I'll be gone 3 weeks, possibly 4 depending on weather and market conditions. Emma nodded, her hand still on the spoon she'd been using to serve. Otis said he'll check on us regularly. He will, and I'm leaving you my Colt revolver. Do you know how to shoot? Thomas taught me. He wanted me to be able to defend the house when he was away. Good. Keep it loaded and within reach. If Wade or any of his men come around, you don't open the door. You don't talk to them. You tell them I'll be back soon and they can discuss matters with me then. And if they don't accept that, then you do what you have to do to protect yourself and Sarah. Nobody would fault you for it. Emma set down the spoon and came to stand before him. Jack, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about making a choice while you're gone. And I want you to know I've already made it. When you come back, if you still want to ask me properly, my answer will be yes. Not because of the law or the pastor or the money, but because in 3 weeks, you've shown me more respect and kindness than my husband showed me in 8 years of marriage. Jack felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced since Margaret. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was possibility, hope, the beginning of something that might, with time and care, become love. Then I'll ask properly when I return, he said, the right way, with the right words. You deserve that much. I don't need pretty words, Jack. I just need honest ones. Then you'll get both. Sarah appeared at Emma's side, holding something in her small hands. Mr. Jack, I made you something for your trip. She held out a scarf, knitted from yarn in shades of blue and gray. The stitches were uneven and there were several dropped loops, but it had been made with care and concentration. Sarah, this is beautiful, Jack said, taking the scarf and wrapping it around his neck. I'll wear it every day. It's to remember us by, so you won't forget to come back. Jack knelt down, bringing himself to Sarah's eye level. I could never forget you two. You're the reason I'm going in the first place. He touched the scarf. But I'll wear this anyway, because it'll remind me what I'm coming home to. He stood, aware that he was crossing lines he'd carefully maintained for 3 weeks, but no longer caring. He pulled Emma into a brief embrace, feeling her stiffen in surprise before relaxing against him. Stay safe, he murmured into her hair. Both of you. You too, Emma whispered back. Please come back to us, Jack. I will. That's a promise. He left the cabin before he could change his mind, before the fear of leaving them vulnerable could override his determination to make this right. As he crossed the yard to the main house, he touched the scarf Sarah had given him and the Confederate badge in his pocket. Both were reminders of the past. But more importantly, they were promises for the future. A future he intended to fight for with everything he had. Jack Carter left at dawn with 30 head of cattle and 3 hired cowboys from Miles City who had agreed to make the winter drive for triple wages. The morning was bitter cold, the kind that made breath freeze in beards and turned exposed skin white in minutes. Emma and Sarah stood on the porch watching as the small herd disappeared into the gray distance, becoming first shapes and then shadows and then nothing at all. Emma kept her hand on Sarah's shoulder, feeling the girl tremble beneath her shawl. Whether from cold or emotion, she couldn't tell. Perhaps both. He'll come back, Sarah said, though her voice held more hope than certainty. Yes, Emma agreed, making her own voice firm. He will. But as they turned back into the warmth of the house, Emma felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. Jack had made promises, but the winter mountains made promises too. Promises written in snow and ice, and the bones of men who had thought themselves strong enough to challenge them. The first week passed in anxious routine. Otis came every 2 days bringing supplies and news from town. The news was rarely good. Jeremiah Wade had been to see Pastor Morrison 3 times, demanding action on the matter of his missing sister-in-law. The pastor had extended Jack's deadline by 2 weeks out of respect for the cattle drive. But no further. When Jack returned, there would need to be a resolution. What if he doesn't make it back in time? Emma asked Otis on his 4th visit. The older man was silent for a moment, tamping tobacco into his pipe. Then we'll figure something out. I can marry you to someone else if need be, or we can try to track down your brother William and get him here to challenge Wade's authority. I don't want to marry someone else, Emma said quietly, and I'm not even sure William would want anything to do with me after all these years. Family's family, Emma. Blood runs deeper than time. Unless that blood was split on different sides of a war. Otis had no answer to that. On the 8th day, a rider appeared on the horizon. Emma's heart leaped, thinking it might be Jack returned early, but as the figure drew closer, she saw it was a stranger. A tall man on a gray horse, riding with the easy confidence of someone who knew how to handle himself in rough country. Emma grabbed Jack's colt from where it hung near the door and stepped onto the porch. Sarah pressed close behind her. The rider stopped 50 feet from the house, making no threatening moves. He was perhaps 40 years old, with gray streaking his dark hair and a long scar running down his left cheek. He wore a sheriff's badge on his coat, and his eyes were the same shade of blue as Emma's own. I'm looking for Emma Hayes, he called out. I mean no harm. I just want to talk. Emma's hand tightened on the gun. Who's asking? The man dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. My name is William Hayes. I'm told you might be my sister. The world seemed to tilt beneath Emma's feet. The gun wavered in her grip. William died at Gettysburg. We got word. We buried an empty grave. I was wounded at Gettysburg, lost my memory for 2 years. By the time I recovered and came looking, the family was gone. William took a careful step forward. Emma, look at me. Really look. Do you remember the scar I got when I fell out of the oak tree when you were 6? It's still there. He touched his right eyebrow where a white line cut through. Emma stared at him, memories flooding back. William climbing too high in the old oak behind their father's house. The crack of breaking branch. His scream as he fell, blood pouring from his forehead while their mother pressed cloth against the wound. William, she whispered. It's me, Emma. I swear it's me. The gun fell from Emma's nerveless fingers. She stumbled down the porch steps, and William caught her as her legs gave way. They stood there in the snow, brother and sister reunited after 15 years of believing the other dead, both of them crying without shame. Sarah watched from the porch, confused but understanding enough to stay back while the adults sorted through their emotions. Eventually, Emma pulled away, wiping her eyes. "How did you find me?" Word travels in Montana territory. A sheriff 2 counties over mentioned that a woman named Emma Wade was living at Jack Carter's ranch, and there was some legal trouble brewing. I came as soon as I heard. William's eyes traveled over her face, noting the changes time had wrought. "Emma, are you all right? The things I've heard about Jeremiah Wade. I'm alive. That's more than I would have been if Jack hadn't found me." Emma gestured toward the house. "Come inside. There's so much to tell you. So much lost time to account for." They talked 4 hours. Emma told William everything. Their father's decline after receiving word of William's death, the loss of the farm, her marriage to Thomas Wade, the years of quiet cruelty and casual brutality, Thomas's death, Jeremiah's escalating abuse, the stone. William listened with a face that grew progressively darker, his jaw tight with suppressed rage. When Emma finished, he stood and paced to the window, staring out at the snow. "I should have been there," he said hoarsely. "I should have protected you. You didn't know. How could you? I should have tried harder to find you. I went to the old farm, asked around Helena, but everyone said you'd married well and moved away. The Wades told me you wanted nothing to do with your union brother, and I believed them. I let my pride and my hurt convince me not to push harder." "The war damaged all of us," Emma said softly. "We were a family torn in 3 directions. You for the Union. Oh, Daniel for the Confederacy. Father unable to choose and losing both his sons for it." At the mention of Daniel, William turned back to face her. "You know I was there when he died. At Antietam. At the bridge. Jack told me. He was there too." "Jack Carter? The man who took you in?" "He fought for the Union, Pennsylvania 51st. He might have been one of the men who—" Emma couldn't finish the sentence. William's expression was unreadable. "And you can live with that? Knowing he might have killed our brother? Can you live with knowing you might have too? You were in the same battle. You fired your rifle at men wearing Confederate gray. One of them might have been Daniel." The words hung between them like smoke from a fired gun. William sank back into his chair, suddenly looking much older than his 40 years. "I've thought about that every day for 18 years, he said quietly. "Every time I pulled a trigger at Antietam, I wondered if I was killing someone's brother, someone's son. And after the battle, when I found Daniel's body in that field by the creek, I saw that I'd been doing exactly that. Just shooting boys. That's all any of them were. Just boys in different colored uniforms." He pulled something from inside his coat. A Confederate cavalry badge, identical to the one Emma had given Jack, except for a deep dent in the center, where a bullet had struck it after Daniel had fallen. "I took this from his body," William said. "Kept it all these years. Couldn't give it to Father. It would have destroyed him. But I couldn't throw it away either. It's all I have left of him." Emma reached out and took her brother's hand. "Daniel's at peace, William. The war's over. We're all that's left of our family. We can't let the same hate that killed him keep killing us." Before William could respond, the sound of multiple horses approaching made them both go tense. Emma grabbed the Colt again, and William's hand moved to his own weapon. Through the window, they saw 6 riders approaching. At their head was Jeremiah Wade, bigger and more brutal looking than Emma remembered. Behind him rode Billy Carson and 4 other Wade Ranch hands. "Stay inside," William ordered, standing and moving toward the door. "He's here for me," Emma said, "and he'll have to go through me to get you. I'm a sheriff, Emma. I've got legal authority here." "You're not sheriff of this county." "Close enough." William stepped onto the porch, his badge clearly visible on his coat. His hand rested casually near his gun, but Emma could see the tension in his shoulders. Jeremiah Wade reined in his horse 20 feet from the porch. His face was flushed with drink and anger, and his eyes, when they found Emma through the window, were full of malice. "That's my brother's wife," he called out. "I'm here to take her home where she belongs." William's voice was calm but carried clearly in the cold air. "I'm Sheriff William Hayes of Beaverhead County. Emma Hayes is my sister, and she's under my protection. You'll turn around and ride back where you came from." Jeremiah squinted at him. "You got no jurisdiction here, Sheriff. This is Sanders County, and that woman is legally under my guardianship. Your guardianship ended the moment her blood relative appeared to contest it. Montana territory law is clear on that point. The hell it is. She's Wade property until she remarries or 2 years pass. That's 4 months yet. She's not property, Williams said, his voice dropping into something dangerous. She's a human being and my sister. And if you try to take her, you'll answer to me. Billy Carson shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Mr. Wade, maybe we should just go. This ain't worth shooting a sheriff over. Shut up, Carson. I'll decide what it's worth. One of the other hands spoke up. Jeremiah, the man's got a point. We came to reclaim family. We didn't come to start a war with law enforcement. Jeremiah turned in his saddle, glaring at his men. Which one of you cowards wants to be next to lose your job? None of us are losing jobs over this, Billy Carson said. He looked at William. Sheriff, we're leaving. Mr. Wade can sort this out through legal channels if he wants. The hell we are, Jeremiah snarled. He started to dismount, his hand moving toward the rifle on his saddle. William's gun was out and cocked before Jeremiah's feet hit the ground. Don't. The single word carried absolute finality. Jeremiah froze, his hand still on the rifle. You pull that weapon, and I'll put you down, William said. That's not a threat. That's a promise backed by legal authority and 20 years of law enforcement. Now get back on your horse and ride out, or spend the next 6 months in a cell waiting for a judge to sort out whether trying to draw on a sheriff constitutes attempted murder. For a long moment, no one moved. The wind blew snow across the frozen ground. Somewhere far off, a crow cawed. Then Billy Carson turned his horse. I'm out. Anyone with sense is coming with me. 3 of the other hands followed him. That left Jeremiah and one loyal ranch hand, a mean-eyed man Emma recognized as Frank Morrison, a known gunfighter Jeremiah had hired 2 months ago. This isn't over, Jeremiah spat. You hear me, Emma? This isn't close to over. That land in Helena is mine in 4 months. And when Carter doesn't come back from his fool's errand in the mountains, when you've got no protector and no money and nowhere to go, you'll come crawling back. And I'll make you sorry you ever defied me. He remounted and wheeled his horse around, Morrison following. They galloped off toward Wade property, leaving tracks in the snow like scars. William holstered his gun and came back inside. His hands were shaking slightly, the aftermath of adrenaline. That man's dangerous, Emma. He's not going to let this go. I know, but Jack will be back, and when he is, we'll have the money to pay off the mortgage. Then Jeremiah can't touch me. What if Jack doesn't make it back? What if something happens on the drive? Then I'll figure out something else, but I won't go back to the Wades. I'd rather die free than live as Jeremiah's prisoner. William studied his sister's face, seeing in it a strength and determination that hadn't been there when she was 14, and he rode off to war. You love him, don't you, this Jack Carter? Emma considered the question carefully. I don't know if it's love yet, but it's something. Respect, gratitude, hope. Maybe love grows from those things. Thomas certainly taught me it doesn't grow from fear and obligation. Tell me about him, about Jack. So Emma did. She told William about the rescue from the stone, about Jack's quiet competence and gentle care during her recovery, about the way he treated Sarah with respect instead of dismissal, about his grief for his own lost family, and how he carried it without letting it turn him cruel. And she told him about Antietam, about the scars both men carried from that terrible day, about the Confederate badge she'd given Jack to carry on his drive. William was quiet for a long time after she finished. He sounds like a good man, the kind of man who does what's right even when it costs him. He is, and I won't let him pay for my freedom with his life. If something happens to him out there, I'll never forgive myself. Then we'll pray he makes it back safe. William stood. I'm going to stay in the area until this is resolved. There's a boarding house in Cold Springs where I can rent a room. I'll check on you daily. And Emma, if Wade comes back before Jack returns, you send Sarah to town immediately. I'll handle it. I don't want you getting killed for me either. I'm a sheriff. Handling men like Jeremiah Wade is part of the job. William pulled her into an embrace. We've lost too many years already. I'm not losing you again. The next 10 days crawled past with agonizing slowness. William visited daily as promised, and Otis continued his regular rounds. Sarah grew quieter as the days passed, spending long hours standing on the porch looking toward the mountains where Jack had disappeared. Emma tried to maintain routine and normalcy, but found her own attention constantly drifting to the western horizon. Every rider in the distance made her heart leap. Every day that passed without word made her fear grow. She knew the drive should take 3 weeks at minimum. She knew Jack had said possibly 4. But knowing and feeling were different things, and the feeling that something had gone terribly wrong grew stronger with each passing day. On the 18th day after Jack's departure, Emma was in the cabin mending clothes when Sarah burst through the door. "Mama, someone's coming. It's not Uncle William, it's someone else." Emma grabbed the Colt and followed Sarah outside. A lone rider was approaching from the west, but the distance and blowing snow made it impossible to identify. Her finger rested on the trigger guard as the figure drew closer. Then the rider resolved into focus, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. Jack Carter, thinner than when he'd left and with a new hardness around his eyes, but alive, alive and home. Emma didn't remember dropping the gun or running across the snow. She only remembered the moment Jack dismounted and caught her in his arms, holding her tight while she pressed her face against his chest and felt his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her cheek. "You came back," she whispered. "You actually came back. I promised I would." Jack's voice was rough with exhaustion and emotion. "I keep my promises." Sarah crashed into both of them, her small arms wrapping around as much of them as she could reach. "Papa Jack, you're home!" The word Papa rang in the cold air, and Jack's arms tightened around both of them. "I'm home, and I'm not leaving again." Eventually, they made their way inside where warmth and food awaited. As Jack ate his away, he told them about the drive, about the blizzard that had killed 5 head of cattle in the snowy mountains, about crossing the frozen Musselshell River and losing 3 more when the ice broke, about arriving in Miles City with only 22 cattle instead of 30. "I sold them for $55 each," he said. "Market had gone up since last month. Got $1,210. With my $800 in savings, that put me at $2,010. Still short $390. Emma's heart sank. "So we don't have enough." Jack was quiet for a moment, his jaw working. He hadn't told her the rest of the story yet. The part where he'd stood in the Miles City saloon with $2,010 in his pocket and $390 short of saving her freedom. "I went to the poker table," he said finally. Emma's eyes widened. "Jack, you don't gamble." "I don't. Hadn't touched cards in 15 years. Not since I lost a month's wages in Abilene when I was 22. He looked down at his hands, remembering. "But I was out of options. The bank wouldn't loan against a ranch that wasn't paid off. No one in Miles City knew me well enough to extend credit. It was gamble or fail." Sarah had stopped eating, listening with wide eyes. There were 5 men at the table, cattlemen mostly, and one railroad executive in a fine suit who looked like he'd never missed a meal in his life. 5-card draw. Ante was $50. Jack's voice took on the flat quality of a man recounting facts he'd rather forget. "First hand I folded. Ace high, nothing else. Lost $50. Second hand, I caught 3 sevens. Won 120. Third hand, I tried to bluff on a pair of 10s. The railroad man read me like a book. Lost 80. Emma reached across the table and took his hand. He squeezed back, grateful for the anchor. Fourth hand, last hand. The pot was at $390. Exactly what I needed. Jack's eyes were distant, seeing that saloon table, smelling the whiskey and tobacco smoke. I looked at my cards. Full house, queens over 9s. Best hand I'd seen all night. I pushed everything forward, every dollar I had left. All in. Sarah whispered, "What happened?" The railroad executive smiled. That's when I knew I was beat. He called my bet and turned over his cards. Jack paused. 4 threes. Emma's hand tightened on his. "Oh, Jack." "I watched $390 disappear into his pile. Watched your freedom disappear with it. I stood up from that table with nothing. Not even enough for a meal." The cabin was silent except for the crackle of the fire. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Carter? Jack Carter?" I turned around and saw an old man with a white beard. Had to be 70 if he was a day. Took me a second to place him. Then I remembered. Garrett. Old man Garrett. I'd worked his cattle drive in '76. Jack's voice softened with something like wonder. He stepped forward and said, "Heard you need $500. Something about saving a woman's land." I didn't know how he'd heard. Small town, I suppose. Word travels. I started to explain, but he held up his hand. "You saved my son's life in that stampede near Cheyenne. Bull had broken loose, would have trampled young Thomas if you hadn't pulled him clear. Risked your own neck doing it." Jack looked at Emma. "I'd forgotten about that. It was just something you did on a drive. Someone's in trouble. You help them." Garrett pulled out a roll of bills, $500, more money than most men saw in a year. He counted it out and put it in my hand. "No interest," he said. "Pay me when you can. A debt of honor works both ways. You saved my son. Now I save your woman." Emma's eyes were bright with tears. "He just gave it to you?" "He did," said a man who rides into danger for someone else's child deserves help when he needs it himself. Jack pulled the envelope from his coat. "So yes, I have enough, $2,510 total. Paid your debt with 110 left over." "I didn't say that." Jack reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. "I didn't say that." Jack reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. "I went to the Miles City Bank, took out a loan for $500 against my ranch as collateral. That gave me enough to pay the debt with 110 left over." He pulled out a folded paper and handed it to Emma. "This is the deed to your father's land in Helena, 160 acres, free and clear. It's in your name now. Jeremiah Wade has no claim on it." Emma unfolded the paper with shaking hands, staring at the official stamps and signatures. "You paid my debt. Our debt, if you'll have me, because I need to ask you something properly now, the way you deserve." Jack stood, wincing slightly at the stiffness in his legs from weeks in the saddle. He knelt before Emma, ignoring Sarah's delighted gasp. "Emma Hayes, I'm not a young man and I'm not a rich man. I've got a falling down ranch and more ghosts than most. But I've also got two hands that'll work hard, a heart that's learning to feel again, and a promise that I'll do everything in my power to keep you and Sarah safe and happy for the rest of my days. Will you marry me?" Emma looked at this man who had risked everything for her, who had kept every promise he'd made, who had given her back not just freedom, but hope. The answer had been in her heart for weeks now. She'd just been waiting for him to come home to give it. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." Jack pulled a ring from his pocket, the simple silver band that had belonged to his mother. Emma held out her hand, and he slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Sarah bounced excitedly. "Does this mean we're a real family now?" "We've been a real family for a while," Jack said, standing and pulling them both close. "This just makes it official." A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Jack's hand moved toward his gun, but Emma touched his arm. "It's all right, that'll be my brother." "Your brother?" The door opened and William Hayes stepped inside, stopping short when he saw the three of them standing together, Emma's hand with its new ring clearly visible. "William," Emma said, "this is Jack Carter. Jack, this is my brother William. He's alive. He's been alive all these years. He found me while you were gone." Jack and William stared at each other across the small room. Two veterans of the same terrible war. Two men who had fought on the same blood-soaked ground where Emma's youngest brother had died. Then William extended his hand. "Thank you for saving my sister's life and for giving her back her freedom." Jack shook the offered hand. "I did what any decent man should do." "Most men aren't decent. The fact that you are matters." William's eyes moved to the ring on Emma's finger. "I see congratulations are in order." "We'll need someone to perform the ceremony," Emma said. "Pastor Morrison won't do it. He's too close to the Wades." "I can do it," William said. "I'm licensed to perform marriages in Montana Territory. It's part of being a sheriff." He smiled. "When did you want to do this?" Jack and Emma looked at each other. "Tonight," they said simultaneously. William's eyebrows rose. "Tonight? Don't you want time to prepare, to make it proper?" "We've had 3 weeks to prepare," Emma said, "and I don't need proper. I just need legal. Once we're married, Jeremiah can't touch me. That's what matters." "Then we'll need witnesses," William said. I'll ride to town and get Otis. Anyone else? Just Otis, Jack said. This doesn't need to be a big affair. Just family. Where do you want to do it? Jack looked at Emma. She knew what he was thinking without him having to say it. The same thought had been growing in her own mind. The stone, she said quietly. I want to get married at the stone where I almost died, so that place becomes something beautiful instead of something terrible. William looked uncertain. Emma, are you sure? After what happened there, I'm sure that's where my old life ended. It should be where my new life begins. And so as the winter sun began its descent toward the western mountains, a small group gathered at the bend in the Yellowstone River where a flat stone sat in the frozen shallows. Jack had ridden ahead to prepare. When Emma and Sarah arrived with William and Otis, they found the stone covered with pine boughs and winter berries, the only flowers that could survive Montana's brutal cold. Torches had been driven into the snow around the site, their flames dancing in the evening breeze. It was beautiful and strange and perfect. Emma stood on the stone where she had been left to die, but this time she stood freely, with her daughter at her side and the man she had chosen waiting to take her hand. William's voice carried clear and strong in the still air. We gather here not in a church building, but in God's true cathedral under the vast Montana sky. Emma Hayes and Jack Carter come before us to make vows not out of obligation or law, but out of choice and hope, and the courage to build something new from the ashes of the past. He looked at Jack. Do you, Jack Carter, take Emma Hayes as your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to stand beside her in prosperity and hardship, to honor her choices and protect her freedom, to be a father to her daughter and a partner in all things? Jack's voice was steady and sure. I do. I promise all of this and more. I promise that the protection I offer will never become a cage, that the home I provide will always be a place of safety, and that every day I draw breath, I'll work to be worthy of the trust she's placing in me. William turned to Emma. Do you, Emma Hayes, take Jack Carter as your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to stand beside him in prosperity and hardship, to honor his choices and build with him a life founded on respect and truth? Emma looked at Jack, at his sun-darkened face and steady eyes, at the man who had saved her life and then given her the freedom to choose her own future. I do, she said firmly. I promise to be his partner, not his possession, to build with him a home founded on honesty and trust, and to honor the man he is while helping him become everything he can be. Then by the authority vested in me by Montana territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. Jack, you may kiss your bride. Jack leaned in slowly, giving Emma time to pull back if she wished. But she didn't wish. She met him halfway, their lips meeting in a kiss that was tender and chaste, but filled with promise. Sarah cheered. Otis wiped his eyes. William smiled. And on a frozen stone where death had nearly claimed her, Emma Hayes Carter began her new life. The celebration was small and simple. They returned to the ranch where Otis had prepared food and William produced a bottle of decent whiskey. They ate and drank and talked late into the night, William and Jack sharing war stories that had been mellowed by time into something almost bearable. At one point, William pulled out Daniel's Confederate badge, and Jack pulled out the identical one Emma had given him. The two brothers looked at the pieces of metal that represented so much pain and loss and division. To Daniel, William said quietly, raising his glass, who fought for what he believed in and died with honor. May we honor his memory by refusing to let his death keep dividing us. To Daniel, Jack echoed, and to all the boys who never made it home, North and South both. They drank, and in that moment the air changed. The war that had torn Emma's family apart finally released its grip. The past would always be there, but it no longer had the power to poison the future. Eventually, William and Otis departed for town, leaving Jack and Emma and Sarah alone in the house that was now truly home to all of them. Sarah was already half asleep, exhausted by excitement. Jack carried her to the small room they'd prepared for her, tucking her under quilts with the gentleness of a man who had once been a father and remembered how. Good night, Papa Jack, Sarah murmured. Good night, little one. Sweet dreams. I'm glad you came home. I'm glad we're a family now. So am I. When he returned to the main room, Emma was standing by the fire, her back to him. She was still wearing the simple dress she'd been married in, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. Thank you, she said quietly. For everything. For saving us. For the cattle drive. For the money. For this. She touched the ring on her finger. Jack came to stand beside her. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. Because you didn't have to do any of it. You chose to. And that choice changed everything. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance in the hearth. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady, covering the world in fresh white. Jack, Emma said eventually, I know this marriage started as a practical solution to a legal problem, but I want you to know I'm going to work to make it more than that. I'm going to try to be a good wife to you, a real wife. Jack turned to face her. Emma, we'll figure out what this marriage is together. There's no rush, no expectations. We'll take it day by day and see where it leads us. But you must want, that is, a man has needs. Jack placed a gentle hand on her cheek. I want a partner, someone who chooses to be with me, not someone who feels obligated. Whatever else develops between us will happen naturally when we're both ready. And if it never happens, that's fine too. What matters is that we're honest with each other and kind to each other. The rest will sort itself out. Emma felt tears sting her eyes. Thomas had never spoken to her like this, had never considered her feelings or her readiness. He had simply taken what he considered his right as a husband, leaving her to endure and survive as best she could. I think, she said slowly, that I could learn to love a man like you. And I think, Jack replied, that I'm already halfway there with you. He pulled her close, and they stood that way for a long time, two damaged people learning to trust again, learning to hope again, learning that sometimes the cruelest winters could lead to the gentlest springs. In the small bedroom, Sarah slept peacefully for the first time in months, secure in the knowledge that her family was finally safe and whole. And outside, the snow continued to fall, covering old tracks and making space for new ones, burying the past under layers of white and creating a fresh canvas for whatever the future might bring. Jack and Emma Carter's life together had begun. Not with grand romance or dramatic declarations, but with simple promises made and kept, with kindness offered and accepted, with two people choosing each other freely in a world that had tried very hard to take choice away from them both. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers. Jack Carter, 97 years old, looked at his grandson Samuel across the dimming light. That stone where Grandma and I married, Jack said quietly. It's still there by the Yellowstone. Every spring, someone plants flowers. That's the covenant, Samuel. Not just protecting, but transforming places of death into places of life. He reached into his vest and pulled out the silver ring worn thin by 60 years of wear. This ring has been on 3 hands, my mother's, your grandmother Emma's, your father Joshua's, when he went to war. Jack pressed the ring into Samuel's palm. Now it's yours. Bring it back from your war. Pass it to your son someday. That's how the covenant continues. Samuel closed his fingers around the ring, feeling the weight of generations. I'll bring it back, Grandpa, I promise. I know you will, boy. Now get some sleep. You've got a train to catch at dawn. Montana, 1995. An old man stood before a classroom of high school students, the silver ring on a chain around his neck. My grandfather told me that story in 1943, Samuel Carter said, his voice still strong at 78. He died the next year, never knowing if I'd keep my promise. But I did. Wore this ring through Normandy, through the Bulge, through hell itself. He lifted the ring into the light. My son wore it in Korea. My grandson wore it in Desert Storm. Tomorrow, my great-grandson leaves for Bosnia. Samuel looked at the young faces before him. The covenant isn't about war. It's about what you do after. It's about taking the broken places and making them whole again. It's about keeping promises when everything says you should quit. He touched the ring gently. Jack and Emma had 56 years together, 4 children, 11 grandchildren, more great-grands than I can count, all because one man chose to ride towards someone else's pain instead of away from it. That's the covenant. That's what this ring means. And God willing, it'll mean the same thing 100 years from now. Outside the classroom window, snow was falling on Montana, just as it had in the winter of 1883. Some things never change. Some things should never change.